Somewhere inside your mind, there is a memory you would defend under oath. Not a vague one, a vivid one. The color of the room, the expression on someone's face, the exact words they spoke. You don't think you remember it. You know you remember it. There's only one problem. It may never have happened that way. Before we continue, choose one memory from your childhood. Not your happiest, not your worst. Just one you have never had a reason to question. Don't tell me. Just keep it with you. We're coming back to it. This archive is not about forgetting. Forgetting is expected. Forgetting is ordinary. The real danger is remembering something with complete confidence that never happened at all, and having absolutely no way from the inside to tell the difference. For centuries, memory was treated like a storage room. An event happens, the brain stores it. Years later, you open the door, retrieve the memory, and nothing inside is changed. Simple, reliable, accurate. It is also wrong. In 1974, a psychologist asked a question so ordinary, most people overlooked its importance. What happens to a memory after it has already been formed? The answer did not simply change psychology, it changed how courts evaluate eyewitnesses. It changed criminal investigations. It changed what scientists believed about the human mind. Her name was Elizabeth Loftus. Loftus invited volunteers to watch footage of a traffic accident. Nothing unusual, just a short film. Afterward, she asked each participant a simple question. Not the same question, almost the same question. One group was asked, how fast were the cars going when they hit each other? Another group heard, how fast were the cars going when they smashed into each other? One word. That was the only difference. The footage never changed. The accident never changed. Only the question. Days later, the participants returned. This time they were asked another question. Did you see the broken glass? There was only one problem. There wasn't any. No broken glass appeared anywhere in the footage. Yet the people who had heard the word smashed were far more likely to remember seeing it. Not because they wanted to please the researchers, not because they were careless, not because they were lying. They were remembering, with complete sincerity, a detail their own minds had quietly inserted. Think about what just happened. The memory had already been created. The event was over. And yet, a single word spoken afterward reached backward and changed the past. Not the event, the memory of it. Psychologists call this the misinformation effect. The name sounds technical. The implication is not. If one carefully chosen word can alter a memory you genuinely experienced, what else can be altered? Could someone change an entire conversation? An entire afternoon? An entire childhood event? At first, that question sounded unreasonable. Even Elizabeth Loftus wasn't trying to prove memories could be invented. She simply followed the evidence wherever it led. And eventually, the evidence led somewhere no one expected. Not to a changed memory, to a memory that never existed in the first place. They called it the Lost in the Mall experiment. The title sounds harmless. What it revealed was not. Elizabeth Loftus and psychologist Jacqueline Pickrell recruited volunteers for what appeared to be a study about childhood memories. Each participant received several short stories. They were told the stories had come from members of their own family. Most of them had. One had not. 3 stories described real events: a family vacation, a birthday, an ordinary moment from childhood. The 4th described something entirely different. As a child, you became lost in a shopping mall. You wandered away from your family. You were frightened. An elderly stranger helped you. Eventually, you were reunited with your parents. It was detailed, believable, emotionally ordinary. There was just one problem. None of it had ever happened. The participants didn't know that. They simply did what any of us would do. They searched their memories. At first, most said they couldn't remember the event. That should have been the end of the story. It wasn't. Over the following interviews, something began to change. Some participants started remembering fragments: a hallway, a feeling, a store. Then came more details: the color of the floor, the sound of people talking, the relief of finding their parents. Details the researchers had never suggested. Details created entirely by the participants themselves. Roughly 1 in 4 participants eventually accepted the false event as a genuine childhood memory. Not because they were gullible, because the human mind prefers a complete story over an empty space. When presented with a believable frame, it quietly begins filling in the missing pieces. One participant continued insisting the event had happened, even after being told the entire story had been fabricated. The emotion felt real. The fear felt real. The memory felt real. And that is precisely what makes false memories so dangerous. They do not feel different from true ones. There is no warning light, no internal alarm, no sensation that tells you, this one was manufactured. From the inside, they are experienced exactly the same. The experiment has been repeated in different forms ever since. Researchers have successfully implanted memories of taking a hot air balloon ride that never occurred, memories of spilling punch at a wedding where nothing was spilled. Different stories, the same result. The brain doesn't simply retrieve memories, it builds them. Sometimes from real events, sometimes from suggestions, sometimes from both. At this point, you might be thinking this only happens inside laboratories. After all, participants were given carefully designed stories by trained researchers. Real life is different. It has to be. Unfortunately, real life places memory under far greater pressure than any laboratory ever could. Imagine witnessing a crime, not from a comfortable chair, but in the middle of fear, poor lighting, loud voices, adrenaline, a face you've never seen before, visible for only a few seconds. Hours later, or perhaps days later, someone asks you to identify that face. You answer honestly. You believe every word you say. Would honesty be enough? The Innocence Project has spent decades using DNA evidence to re-examine criminal convictions. Again and again, they discovered something unsettling. People had confidently identified the wrong person, not because they intended harm, not because they were dishonest, because confidence and accuracy are not the same thing. Memory does not become unreliable only when someone lies. It becomes unreliable when it quietly changes, without the person noticing it has changed. A detective asks one leading question. A newspaper publishes a photograph. Two witnesses compare what they remember. None of these moments seem important on their own, yet each one has the power to reshape what feels like direct experience. And psychologists call one version of this memory conformity. Two people witness the same event. Later, they discuss it. Neither intends to influence the other. Neither realizes they already have. Gradually, their separate memories begin merging into one shared account. Each person leaves believing the memory is entirely their own. Neither notices where their memory ends and the other person's begins. Elizabeth Loftus would later testify in hundreds of courtrooms, not to accuse witnesses of lying, but to explain something much more difficult for juries to accept. Sincerity is not proof. A witness can speak with absolute confidence, pass every test for honesty, relive the emotion with tears in their eyes, and still describe an event that no longer exists the way they remember it. Which brings us back to the memory you chose at the beginning of this archive. You trusted it because it felt vivid. You trusted it because it carried emotion. You trusted it because it belonged to you. But perhaps those were never guarantees of accuracy. Perhaps they were only guarantees that the memory had become part of you. Do you remember the event, or do you remember the last time you remembered it? It sounds like the same question. It isn't. For decades, neuroscientists believed that once a memory was stored, it remained largely untouched until the next time it was retrieved. Then researchers began noticing something unusual. Recalling a memory wasn't simply opening a file, it was reopening it, and an open file can be edited. In the early 2000s, neuroscientist Karim Nader explored this idea through studies on fear memories. His team discovered that when a memory was brought back into awareness, it briefly entered a fragile state before being stored again. During that window, the memory could change. Not because the past had changed, because the brain was writing the memory back into storage. Think about what that means. Every time you revisit an important memory, every time you tell the story, every time you replay it in your mind, you aren't simply observing it, you're participating in it. You leave fingerprints on the memory before placing it back where you found it. The next time you remember it, you may not be remembering the original event. You may be remembering the last version your mind created. The memories you repeat most often may feel the strongest. That doesn't necessarily make them the most accurate. It may simply mean they've been reconstructed the greatest number of times. There is another phenomenon that demonstrates this on an extraordinary scale, not in one laboratory, not in one courtroom, across millions of people. Perhaps you've experienced it yourself. A movie quote you're certain was spoken, but wasn't. A familiar logo you could draw from memory, until you discover you've been drawing it incorrectly for years. A childhood character you remember with complete confidence, only to learn that version never existed. This became known as the Mandela Effect, named after the widespread false memory that Nelson Mandela died in prison during the 1980s. He didn't. He was released in 1990 and lived until 2013. Yet thousands of people remembered a completely different history. Not vaguely, confidently. Some concluded that reality itself had changed, that parallel timelines had somehow crossed. It's an interesting story. The evidence points somewhere else. The human brain doesn't store isolated facts. It stores patterns. It predicts. It fills gaps. It completes unfinished pictures. When information is incomplete, the brain often chooses the version that makes the most sense, not necessarily the version that actually happened. A wealthy cartoon character feels like the kind of character who should wear a monocle. A famous movie quote feels more natural with different wording. A historical story seems to have the ending our brains expect. Over time, expectation quietly replaces observation. Then repetition turns expectation into certainty. Millions of people can therefore arrive at the same false memory without ever speaking to one another. Not because reality shifted, because human memory follows remarkably similar rules, the same patterns, the same shortcuts, the same reconstruction process. Which leaves us with a far more personal question. If millions of unrelated minds can independently construct the same false memory, what confidence should any one of us place in the version playing inside our own? Let's review the evidence. A single word changed a remembered accident. A fabricated childhood story became a genuine memory. Honest eyewitnesses confidently identified innocent people. Every act of remembering subtly reshaped the memory itself. And millions of strangers arrived at identical memories of events that never occurred. None of this means your memory is broken. In fact, it suggests the opposite. Your memory is functioning exactly as it evolved to function. Evolution never designed memory to be a courtroom transcript. It designed memory to help you survive. A survival system doesn't need perfect detail. It needs useful detail. It needs to recognize danger, to remember what mattered, to predict what might happen next. Accuracy was never its highest priority. Efficiency was. That design served our ancestors remarkably well. It serves us remarkably well today. Until we ask memory to do something it was never built to do, to become perfect evidence. The broken glass that never existed, the shopping mall you were never lost in, the conversation you remember word for word. None of these arrive wearing labels that say false. They arrive exactly the way true memories do. Complete, detailed, emotionally convincing. Elizabeth Loftus spent more than 5 decades demonstrating one uncomfortable truth. The human mind does not retrieve the past. It rebuilds it, again and again and again, using whatever pieces are available, including pieces that were added long after the original moment had passed. So return, one final time, to the memory you chose at the beginning of this archive. Don't ask yourself whether it feels real. You already know it does. Ask a different question, a better question. How much of what I'm remembering belongs to the moment? And how much belongs to every time I've remembered it since? The evidence has been presented. The verdict belongs to you. Archive 002, sealed.